We're not starting at the beginning here, we're starting in the middle of something. The love here is not the issue. The issue here is her trying to figure herself out. She is not a separate entity from the wildflowers. She is in fact her own version of wildflowers. She's promising to put herself in a vulnerable state. Why? These are like really cool flowers that don't care about what other people say. They're like, I'm literally planting myself here, deal with it. Hi everyone, welcome to this video. On my channel, I analyze song lyrics very in depth through the lens of literary analysis. Today we are doing another song from Lana Del Rey's newest album, Blue Banisters. I asked you guys on my channel and also on my Instagram, make sure to follow me, which song you wanted me to do sooner, and a majority of you said Wildflower, Wildfire. I will make sure to link my Lana Del Rey playlist below. It contains all the songs I've analyzed so far. From this newest album, we've already done the title track, Blue Banisters, Arcadia, and I've also analyzed the Blue Banisters music video. As a quick disclaimer, everything presented in this video is my own personal opinion. Music is very subjective. Everyone's gonna have their own take on it, and I always encourage you to share yours down below in the comments. I value words a lot, so in my analyses, I tend to concentrate on diction, which is word choice, and connotation, which can be thought of as the vibes or the emotions that the words elicit. Let's get started. I actually have a lot to say about this song title. This song is called Wildflower, Wildfire. It's an alliteration. An alliteration is when we have words right after one another that begin with the same letter or the same sound. I don't usually interpret alliterations as being the most important literary device, but I find them quite pleasant, so I always like to point it out to you guys. Usually I find that alliterations draw more attention to the words. Naturally, the reader or the listener is gonna pay a little bit more attention, apply a little bit more focus to what's being said. I personally am interpreting this song title as a juxtaposition. A juxtaposition is when things are set side by side for the purpose of comparison. For me, the word wildflower and the word wildfire are similar in a way, but in the grand scheme of things, they're opposing. A wildflower is a flower of an uncultivated variety or a flower growing freely without human intervention. It's a flower that grows in the wild, meaning that it was not intentionally seeded or planted. It just somehow found itself where it is. This connotes a feeling of strength and freedom on part of the wildflower, and it kind of brings forth the feeling of fate because that wildflower wasn't actually planted there. There was no intention of it being there, but it still is there despite that. So it's like it's fated to be there. It's destiny for that flower to grow there. It's beating the odds. It's like a miracle of sorts. Flowers are really beautiful. On my channel, I take nature imagery very seriously. If you know, you know. I view nature as something that's very pure. It's something that simply exists. I view nature as holding a lot of wisdom. So I interpret nature imagery and nature metaphors in a very serious way. So to me, when we have the mention of a wildflower, which is a dynamic sort of nature that grows and changes, I find that to be pretty positive. In the song Arcadia by Lana Del Rey, we had mention of mountain ranges. Mountain ranges are a part of nature and they're beautiful and they're grand. However, I view mountain ranges as relatively more stagnant than flowers that grow or a stream of water that is always in motion. So I interpreted that mountain range in a negative way. But here we have flowers. Flowers grow, they're dynamic, they're lively, they move a little bit, they dance a little bit in the wind. So far, this is a pretty positive instance of nature imagery. When flowers grow somewhere, they put their roots in. So this flower is creating a life for itself. The roots are its life source. That's where it gets its water and its nutrients. So they are staying put in a place where they're not meant to be. These are like really cool flowers that don't care about what other people say. They're like, I'm literally planting myself here, deal with it. That's how I would metaphorically think about a wildflower. In the definition that I read from Wikipedia, it mentioned native species. I had a whole little segment in my Arcadia analysis where I defined native species, invasive species, etc. because of the lyric, I'm not native. I'll make sure to link my Arcadia analysis below for you. I found that really interesting because it kind of ties in Arcadia to the song a little bit. Arcadia I interpreted as being a very like earthy, scientific sort of song. There were a lot of metaphorical aspects, but they were being manifested in a very cut and dry scientific way. In Arcadia, the protagonist means the main character, says, I'm not native. And I presented the possibility of the protagonist referring to themselves as a native species. So it's interesting, we have the concept of native species presented here again when we look up the word wildflower. This kind of makes me think that maybe in Arcadia, when she says she's not native, maybe she wasn't even saying that she's not like a native person. Maybe she was even in that song viewing herself as like a wildflower. In Lana's song Chemtrails Over the Country Club, again, I will link it below for you if you want to watch. Lana sings, I'm not unhinged or unhappy, I'm just wild. There seems to be a theme of protagonists in Lana's songs viewing themselves as being wild and not native. There's like a common thread of that in at least those 3 songs, probably in more too. But yeah, let me know what you think about that. I think that's really, really interesting and something that maybe we will explore in a separate video if you want. Now let's discuss the word wildfire. The word wild is still a part of this word, right? But this is a different type of wild. This is not the type of wild that we can admire. This is a very destructive and terrifying sort of wild. A wildfire is defined as an unplanned, unwanted, uncontrolled fire. We did have a mention of Santa Clarita wildfires in Lana's song Blue Banisters. So wildfires are unwanted. They can get out of control very quickly. They can damage the land. They can damage people's homes and they can be fatal as well, right? So it's wild in an unhinged sort of way. So that's why for me, these 2 words are in stark contrast to one another. They're very opposing. They both represent different brands or different flavors of being wild. I think of wild personally as like kind of like rebellious, kind of free-spirited, and like spontaneous as well. I align being passionate with being wild, but as I've discussed before, particularly in Lana Del Rey songs, I'm thinking specifically of the song Summertime Sadness, passion can be very beautiful and very wonderful, but if it gets out of hand, it can become very dangerous because it can overtake you and cause you to act in ways that are not chill, in ways that are not safe. I discussed that a lot in my Summertime Sadness analysis. I think it's important to also talk about fire imagery. Fire, I usually align with passion, which we just discussed. When I think of fire, I also think of anger and frustration. Those are other fiery emotions. A fire, when it's under control, can be very beneficial, right? It provides warmth, it's life-sustaining. If you're like out in the wilderness and it's nighttime, you need to build a fire so you can stay warm and be okay. So it can be a very beautiful, necessary thing. And when you think about singular flames, like a candle flame burning, it's beautiful. It creates a very like romantic and cute ambiance, and flames dance. So there can be like a calm nature associated with fire, but when it's a wildfire, it's a completely different type of connotation. It's a type of imagery that I think is representative of an internal state that is unbalanced and uncontrollable, an internal state that is not healthy for the person experiencing it and perhaps for the people around them too, because it can get out of control. We also had mention of a fire in Arcadia. There was a lyric that said, my lips like the fire licks the bay, which we broke down. So Lana really does like to use fire imagery, and it's used in slightly different ways each time, which is really cool and really interesting. Another analysis that I did that had quite a bit of fire imagery was the song Buzzcut Season by Lorde and Ivy by Taylor Swift. I will provide links for that down below as well. So both a wildflower and a wildfire are similar in the sense that they're not planned, but a wildflower is not going to cause destruction the same way a wildfire will. A wildflower can be an invasive species, which means it's going to compete with the natural flowers, the native species that are around. So it can create unbalance in the ecosystem, which can be very devastating. But I would argue that a wildfire is going to create a more immediate sort of danger for plants, animals, and humans. So it's a different sort of danger that a wildfire can cause. And a wildfire is also something that can move very quickly, but a wildfire flower is relatively stationary, or it's going to be concentrated in more of a smaller area. We'll see as we get through the song how the protagonist relates themselves to both a wildflower and a wildfire. I get the sense that the protagonist is naturally inclined to act as a wildfire, to act a little bit unhinged and out of control and destructive, but she is trying to make efforts to act more like a wild flower instead. So she's not gonna lose her wildness. She's just gonna convert it to a different flavor that's safer for herself and others. And I'm using the pronoun her because I'm visualizing it through the perspective of Lana Del Rey, but of course we don't know for sure, so this could be about literally anyone. First one. There is repetition of the phrase, here's the deal. It's repeated 3 times in verse 1. I always talk about how repetition signifies significance. I believe that when a certain word or phrase is repeated, it's a songwriter trying to give us a message or direct our focus towards something, especially when we have songwriters that I view as more intentional, like Lana Del Rey. Taylor Swift also comes to mind. When I hear the phrase, here's the deal, this is the sort of thing you say after stuff has happened, right? After you've had like a conversation with someone about something for a while, or after you've thought about something privately for a while. That's the context in which you would say, okay, here's the deal. It's very much like a let's get down to business, I'm gonna say something important sort of statement. It doesn't have the most positive connotation, but it's not like inherently negative. This is a sort of diction that's kind of in a gray area to me, but there's definitely subtext to this statement. Things were said before the audience was introduced into this song. We're not starting at the beginning here, we're starting in the middle of something. Here's the deal, because I know you want to talk about it. The you here is interesting. It could be referring to a love interest, or perhaps it could be the protagonist talking to us, to whoever is reading these lyrics or listening to this song. I'm more inclined to interpret this as being directed towards a love interest. I would be interested to hear who you think the you is referring to here. Make sure to comment it down below. When it says, I promise you like a million tomorrows, it's interesting because I view here's the deal as a pretty focused, streamlined, serious statement, but the word like here makes that statement seem more casual. It decreases the intensity of what's being said. If it just said, I promise you a million tomorrows, it sounds much more truthful and genuine as opposed to, I promise you like a million tomorrows. It definitely brings forth a more casual vibe to everything. Here's the deal. What I can promise is, it sounds like she's saying what I can actually promise you is the following. I'll lie down like a bed of wildflowers. There's a lot going on here. This is probably gonna be a longer video. Lana songs are usually my longer videos. Blue Bannisters was like an hour and a half. That's just for the song, not the album. So get like snacks, I guess. I don't know, live your life, you guys. I find it very interesting that she's lying down like a bed of wildflowers. She's not lying on a bed of wildflowers or in, like within the wildflowers. She is lying down like them. She is not a separate entity from the wildflowers. She is in fact herself her own version of wildflowers. It's like there's no separation between the protagonist and the bed of wildflowers, right? This is why I think words matter. The diction here, the word like, changes the whole interpretation of this lyric. If she were to say, I promise I'm gonna lie in a bed of wildflowers, I would be like, okay, she wants to be chill, she wants to be surrounded by nature that is connoting fatefulness and destiny, and like that's great. But she's not lying in it, she's not like being consumed by it. She is becoming like the bed of wildflowers, right? And she's lying down. When you lie down, it's not super positive usually. You could be resting when you're lying down, but usually when you lie down, you're gonna be in a more vulnerable position and you're usually making yourself smaller, like physically. It connotes a feeling of defeat a little bit. So I found that interesting. The protagonist is promising to lie down. And you know, wildflowers, like I said, they have roots, which are important. And it's very inspirational that they were able to put roots down where they were not supposed to be. But roots also don't allow you to move. And for a human being, that's very negative. You have to have the ability to go where you want. And also very important to leave a place that is not serving you. So the protagonist is lying down and then also staying put in that lyric. And she's promising that she's gonna do this. So I'm concerned. I always say that I'm very concerned for the protagonists in Lana's songs, but yeah, I am like metaphorically very concerned right now because these are not positive things. I just want to illustrate that like when you lie down, you're becoming very vulnerable. She's promising to put herself in a vulnerable state. Why? This vibe of like making yourself vulnerable, in my opinion, actually opposes the nature and the connotation of wildflowers themselves because they're resilient. They're like wearing metaphorical leather jackets, growing and putting down roots in a place they're not meant to be. And roots for a wildflower is positive because that's part of their natural existence. Flowers need roots to stay alive, but humans need to be able to like leave a place and go to a new place if they deem it safer or necessary. And it can be like about physical safety, geographical safety. You need to like leave like a actual physical place, or we can also think about this emotionally, right? Emotionally, you don't want to ever be lying down. You want to always be able to move from one emotional space into another emotional space if it's not serving you and if it's not healthy for you. So there's a lot of different levels you can look at this with. I do try to provide different perspectives for you guys because the song is going to mean different things to everyone, and that's what's beautiful about music and art. Okay, so, and I'll always make the sheets smell like gardenias, wild at your feet. If you just look at this lyric without going to the next line, it says, and I'll always make the sheets. So it sounds like she's always gonna make the bed. This is kind of like a play on words a little bit. It's really cool. And then she goes on to say, and I'll always make the sheets smell like gardenias wild at your feet. This also supports the idea that this is about a romantic relationship because she's talking about a bed, perhaps the bed that she shares with her love interest. Gardenias are a specific type of flower. Symbolically, a white gardenia typically symbolizes purity, like the purity of someone you love or of a relationship. They also symbolize a feeling of peace and harmony. And then we have red gardenias, which are often thought to symbolize a secret love between two people. Another important thing to note about gardenias is that they are believed to have some sort of medicinal properties. That's what I think is being referred to here when it says, and I nourish you hazily. She's gonna make the bed with her lover smell like gardenias. So it's gonna smell like innocence, maybe, and purity. Maybe there is a genuine purity to this romantic relationship. It suggests to me that the protagonist values this romantic relationship a lot. Perhaps like the love between them is pure. Later on in this song, the protagonist reveals things about herself to her romantic interest. So maybe it's because she views this relationship as being a pure sort of love. That's why she's willing to have this conversation. The word wild is used here, which I think is very important. So the gardenias are just like growing wild at the feet of her love interest. It's interesting we have a mention of her love interest's feet, and then we also had earlier the image of the protagonist lying down. Physically, she's further down than her love interest is. I would usually interpret that in a concerning way and say maybe it's, you know, reflective of the power dynamic in that relationship, but I don't think that's the case. I think she just respects her love interest a lot and has a very pure love for them. I think she just really wants to answer some questions, and as she says later, she wants to fill in some gaps for her love interest. So I think the gardenia as well at his feet are just her really respecting her love. I think that the love here is not the issue. Like the love here is chill, it's like pure. I think that the issue here for the protagonist is her trying to figure herself out. I say that, but then we get to the word hazily. When you're in a haze, you're not like thinking clearly. You're in like an altered state of existence. I talked about altered states and I defined it more in depth in my analysis of the song Cruel Summer by Taylor Swift. An altered state is where you're not in your normal alert state. There's something shifted. For example, being drunk is an altered state. Your sense of judgment is different. And when you're in a haze, you're not really yourself. You wouldn't want to make important life decisions when you're in a haze, right? The fact that she's nourishing her love interest in a way that's hazy, in like a hazily way, is again opposing to me. Nourishing someone is pretty scientific. It's like a pretty streamlined process. She could be referring to like an emotional sort of nourishment, emotional healing through love, etc. So that's a possibility as well. But there's been so much opposition just in this one verse and in the song title that I'm more inclined to interpret the word hazily in a slightly like negative opposing way, but you could also interpret it in a positive way where it's just like romantic and cute and like just emotional. I would really be interested to hear your your opinion about the word hazily, so comment it down below. Another way you can view this, because remember the sheets are going to smell like gardenias, right? So the sheets are going to have a purity associated with them, and this is a romantic relationship, so they're going to be on the bed, you know, engaging in physical activities of love. So there's going to be like a haze perhaps of like pure love around them, which I think is positive. But then when she says weld at your feet, I think that also brings forth some passion as well. So there is like an innocence, a purity, and a sort of passion in those sheets, and those sheets are also at his feet, so they're not on the bed. They've been thrown off the bed. So there is definitely like an undercurrent of passion in the background. And it's interesting that there's like passion being aligned, like adjacent next to like a symbol of purity and like innocence as well. It is kind of opposing, but also not really. Like I don't view that in a negative way. I'm not concerned about that as much because like I mentioned earlier, passion can be very beautiful and wonderful as long as it's balanced. There's like different hints of passion that are manifesting in different ways in this song. So I just really wanted to point that out. I think that's actually very beautiful. Verse 2. The word baby suggests to me, again, that this is about a love interest that the protagonist is talking to. She's kind of stuttering on the word I. This connotes a feeling of nervousness and a little bit of anxiety. What she's talking about maybe isn't easy for her to say, but she's saying it anyways because she wants to communicate it to her romantic partner. It says that the protagonist has been running on stardust, so surviving on stardust. Stardust doesn't like literally exist, right? If you look it up, it says that it's a magical or charismatic quality or feeling. It can be dreamlike, romantic. The protagonist has been surviving on intangible things. There is like a magical quality to the word stardust. It makes me think that the protagonist was struggling and lonely and isolated and was surviving through these intangible thoughts and emotions that make up stardust. She was like creating a vibe for herself and holding on to that vibe in order to survive. There's a lot of different ways you can think about stardust. You can think about stardust as kind of like sweet nothings, not in a romantic sense, but like maybe in kind of like the delusions that you believe in or the beautiful lies you tell yourself to get through something that is difficult. This shows resilience and strength, just like a wildflower. So I find that very interesting. So here she is explaining a little bit of her background life experience to her romantic partner. I wouldn't know what hot fire was. This is interesting, the fact that the word hot is preceding the word fire, because by definition, like a fire is hot, like literally that's like what a fire is. It's something that's hot. This reminds me of a lyric in the song Boston by Augustana. I analyzed that as well. I will link it below for you. It's a really, really good song. I love Augustana. There is a lyric that says in the light of the sun, and I talked about how by definition the sun is literally light. I talked a little bit about how that makes the image of light more significant and brighter in that song. It's the same sort of thing here in my opinion. This makes me interpret the word fire as being extra hot, which is crazy because it's already hot, right? Just like in the song Boston, the sun is already so bright, like that's so much light imagery, but when it says standing in the light of the sun, it makes it even brighter, which is again like whoa. So it's really intensifying the fact that the fire is hot here. This is like an XL version of fire imagery in my opinion. There is a lot of different ways to interpret it. It sounds like she was very isolated and in a very difficult time period in her life. So maybe she like literally didn't have access to hot things. Like maybe she couldn't afford the heat in her place of residence, or emotionally. Maybe she was emotionally cold and she wouldn't know what feeling warm towards another person was like. This could also be romantic as well. Maybe she was isolated romantically and she hadn't felt that spark of passion, of hot fire in a really long time. So there are many different ways to interpret that lyric. As with all lyrics, she hadn't experienced that hot fire, however you want to interpret it, in so long that she kind of forgot what it was like. Then she goes on to say hot fire, hot weather, hot coffee. All of those words have the word hot in front of it. We have repetition of the word hot. Like I said earlier, this could be a literal sort of thing where you know, she just didn't have access to the heat. However, I'm more inclined to interpret the word hot as being like an emotional sort of warmth that she's feeling platonically or romantically. Although, I do want to say this, the word hot to me has a more dangerous connotation than the word warm. So like I do find the use of the word hot specifically to make everything seem more intense, right? For instance, when you think about hell, and I'm not saying that this is hellish in any way, but like when you think about hell, you think of fire, but you don't think of hell as being warm, you think of it as being hot. So the use of the word hot is very, very intense. And when I'm talking about like feeling warmth towards people and like an emotional warmth, I am intentionally using the word warm. I personally wouldn't use the word hot to talk about like an emotional sort of like feeling of contentness and feeling like warm and fuzzy. I wouldn't say like hot and fuzzy because the word hot is like too intense in my opinion. This could not be the case for Lana, right? Maybe when she was writing the song, she was thinking about that word differently. Everything is relative and everyone's gonna bring their own biases in, just like I am. But for me personally, I think of the word hot as being a little bit more intense and a little bit more unstable and a little bit more unbalanced, right? I don't think of passion as being warm, but I do think of passion as being hot. Perhaps this is talking a little bit more about passion and a romantic relationship. She had a lack of passion and a lack of a romantic partner for a while. Maybe that's what the loneliness is referring to. A romantic sort of loneliness. That's how I'm interpreting it. When she repeats hot fire, I think it's talking about like the fire of passion between a lover. Hot weather is interesting because weather is part of the setting. It's having like situational awareness of where you're at, and the setting could be, again, a literal place or an emotional internal place. So she's like, I wouldn't know what any of these things were. For example, I wouldn't know what hot fire was, passion with a lover. I wouldn't know what hot weather was, like situational awareness of where she's at. Like if she was in a situation where there was passion, she wouldn't be able to recognize it. That's how I'm interpreting hot weather. And then hot coffee, you consume coffee, so you're consuming the hotness, the passion. So she forgot what like the passion is like, right? She wouldn't be able to recognize it, and then she wouldn't be able to consume it. She like forgot all of these things. That's how I am personally interpreting that lyric. This is a pretty ambiguous lyric in my opinion, like more than other lyrics in this song. So I would really be interested to know how you would interpret this lyric down below. I'm better with you. It's strange, but it's true, darling. She talked a little bit right now about her lack of passion in her life, and I think it's a romantic sort of passion. She felt alone. She was barely surviving. She was definitely experiencing a lack of some sort. It sounds like it was very difficult for her to get through that. And she's saying that she's better with her current romantic partner. It sounds like being with her romantic partner is allowing her to recognize these things again: the hot fire, the hot weather, and the hot coffee. I'm not sure why it's strange. I don't know why it's strange that she's better with her partner, but it is true. It's true, right? We have to remember, at least how I'm interpreting this song, is like she is having a conversation with her romantic partner. Later in the song, she says she's gonna like fill in some gaps that they asked her about. So I think she's kind of like having to prove, not in like a bad way, but they're communicating about how they feel. And sometimes when you undergo very difficult situations in your life, you may seem cold and standoffish to people, and that understandably makes them question how committed you are to them and how much you love them and care for them. So I think perhaps, again, I don't know for sure, but perhaps that may be the situation where her love interest was like, I feel like you're kind of distant and that you don't love me as much as I love you, or you're not as committed. And to me, this conversation is her explaining her like emotional context and the context of her life, why she may be the way she is, and kind of explaining herself. And the fact that she's willing to do this shows me that she cares for the other person, which reminds me again of the gardenia symbolism, like the purity and the love and everything. So maybe that's why she's saying it's strange, but it's true. She's telling the other person, like, I know this sounds weird because maybe it doesn't come off like this, like maybe I'm not showing affection in a way for you to naturally believe this, but in actuality, I am better with you, and I'm explaining why. That's how I'm gonna think about the song right now. That's what makes sense to me. But again, it's completely open to your interpretation. And when she sings this too, her voice shifts, like it changes, and it sounds kind of like, I don't know, it's like she's screaming it in a like a higher, she's kind of like screaming it in a very like desperate way. Like she really wants her romantic partner to know this. And again, maybe because it may not seem apparent without her stating it chorus. In the chorus, the protagonist is talking about what she hopes to do in the context of this relationship. She is directing this towards her romantic partner. She wants them to know this. When something lights up, imagery-wise, that's usually very positive. It can be suggestive of understanding, of clarity, of truths that are being revealed. However, remember how we discussed earlier that wildfires are not super positive. They're very destructive and chaotic and unbalanced. She doesn't want to turn into a wildfire. She doesn't want to be unbalanced and unpredictable and chaotic. Here, light up is being used in a destructive way. It is lighting up the night, but in like a dangerous way, in like an emotionally dangerous way. Sometimes, if you're used to living in a chaotic way, you will inherently do different things to create chaos. That's like your space of familiarity. I get the feeling that the protagonist's natural inclination is to be a wildfire, to be wild in a way that's destructive and unpredictable, in a way that can hurt other people. I keep thinking back to the lyric in Chemtrails Over the Country Club. The protagonist says that they're wild, right? This seems to be a very important part of their identity. If, we don't know, if this is the same protagonist as the Chemtrails Over the Country Club protagonist, but it's like they want to shift their type of wildness from a wildfire into a wildflower. A wildflower is like a relatively safer sort of wildness. The protagonist wants to light up the night with only her smile, with a different sort of passion, with a more balanced sort of passion, with like a smile. And she says, with nothing that burns. When something burns, it has caught on fire already. It is in the process of burning. It's in the process of being overtaken by that passion, by that fire, by those fiery emotions. So there's already like damage that's being done. So if you burn someone emotionally, you can try to heal it, but the initial pain is always going to be present. So I really do think this is an emotional sort of burning that she's talking about. She doesn't want to hurt anyone or anything due to her wild nature anymore. That's what I think this verse and this song is about. Baby, I'll be like a wildflower. I live on sheer willpower. Again, she wants to change her flavor, her brand of wildness on an internal level. When she says, I live on sheer willpower, this is because, again, wildflowers aren't planted or like supported by anyone. It's just them showing up at a random place, living and thriving where they're at. They're like independent. Like no one's gonna come water them or make sure the soil is okay. It's up to them. So that's why she's saying that she's gonna live on sheer willpower like the wildflowers. I'll do my best never to turn into something that burns. And then we have repetition of the word burn 6 times in the lyric after that. I also want to say that the phrase like the others is really important because this also supports the idea that the protagonist has like a pattern, like a natural inclination to burn others emotionally. She can be very destructive and perhaps self-destructive as well, creating chaos and unbalance. Whether she's aware of it or not, like whether it's intentional or not, I feel like she's had that habit before. It's really great that she is realizing that now, and I love that she's not saying that she doesn't want to be wild anymore. She still is being true to herself and keeping that wildness, but she's changing the intensity. She's making it into a type of wildness that can be very positive and beautiful for herself to be and for others to witness and be around, into a type of wildness that's like respected and admired. And again, burns, the repetition just makes it more significant. She doesn't want to hurt others anymore. She doesn't want to burn bridges, burn relationships. And a wildfire too, this is really important to keep in mind, is not selective in what it burns. Once it gets going, it's gonna burn everything in its path, whether it would want to or not. So that's why it's important for her to not be like a wildfire anymore. Because once you get to a level of like unbalance and passion or anger, it's gonna like blow out of proportion and you're gonna hurt someone you didn't mean to. You don't have control anymore. You really give up your control when you're like an emotional wildfire. Also because the context really matters. Like if it's extra dry or if it's extra windy, the wildfire is going to move forward faster and it's going to spread to a larger area of land. If you have a natural inclination to be emotionally like a wildfire, then other people can perhaps egg you on, right? Or if you've already had a bad day, then you can explode. So you really do kind of hand over your sense of control and power. I definitely think you have more power as a wildflower. And the protagonist knows this too with this sheer willpower lyric. It's really apparent that the protagonist wants to change their ways, which is really good. It shows a lot of self-awareness. Verse 3. Again, we have repetition of the phrase, here's the deal. We talked about that phrase earlier. I still think it has the same connotation in this verse as well. I do view it as kind of like a buffer or a barrier between where the protagonist is about to reveal more private and personal information. And like I mentioned earlier, she talks about how her romantic partner said that there's like gaps to fill in, some things don't make sense. So here she's providing that context. She says that her father never stepped in when his wife would rage at me. Again, we don't know if this is completely autobiographical or not. It could be a mix of, you know, Lana's own life with some fictional elements. I don't know a lot about Lana's personal life. I haven't listened to all of her albums yet. I've said this before, I became a fan when NFR came out, slowly starting to go through her older material. I don't know about her relationship with her mother as much. I googled it, wasn't able to find anything like definitive. Since I'm not super sure about that context, there's two possibilities for me. So when she says wife, it could either be like a stepmom. Again, I don't know if she has a stepmom or not, I'm not sure, but we're just gonna think about this separate from Lana. Or it could be about the protagonist's actual mom. Based on this lyric, it sounds like the protagonist did not have the best relationship with their mother. When it says his wife instead of mother, it creates a distance, right? It makes it impersonal. So this suggests to me that whether this was like a stepmother that maybe the protagonist didn't vibe with that well, or maybe it's the protagonist's actual biological mother, whatever the case may be, it's very possible there was a sort of emotional distance between them. That's why the phrase his wife was used. The protagonist is not willing to refer to this mother figure in relation to themselves, only in relation to their dad. So that's very telling. It seems like that mother figure would take out their anger and be angry towards the protagonist. The protagonist is saying that their father never really stepped in, so she had to endure that. That's obviously a very intense experience. The protagonist is saying that's the reason why she ended up awkward but sweet. Different dynamics in your life, especially growing up, really can affect how you come across to people and how you just are in general, like when you're by yourself or when you're with others in a social setting. So that's what this explanation is meant to do, in my opinion. Just, you know, fill in some gaps for her romantic partner, and also just to explain a little bit about why she is the way she is and why she may come across a certain way. Then it says, later than hospitals and still my feet, comfortably numb, but with lithium came poetry. Lithium here is referring to a medication. It's a mood stabilizer, so we can assume that the protagonist had some mental health issues. I don't know if it's the direct cause of what she explained earlier about this mother figure in her life, but you know, they could all go together. I don't really know, but there were some, you know, issues at home, and then there were also some mental health issues that happened later on. There was definitely a lot that the protagonist had to endure. She had to go to the hospital due to, you know, some of her health issues. I'm assuming it's due to mental health issues just because of the word lithium, so I'm inclined to connect those two lines here together. Comfortably numb. I think that the lithium, the mood stabilizer, is making her feel numb a little bit. That could perhaps be a side effect of the medication. If you're feeling numb, it's usually not a positive thing, but I would imagine if you are in such a intense place with your mental health, feeling numb would be preferred over whatever you were feeling before. That's what I think is being referred to here. For me, when I read comfortably numb in this context, I get the sense that the protagonist feels like safer in that numbness. And when she started taking the medication, when she started to feel numb and just, I guess, more kind of like chill relatively, she was able to write poetry. She was able to perhaps focus on honing in on this gift she has of writing. It really seems like getting help and going on that medication helped the protagonist kind of focus and spend time on writing poetry. These are very intimate details. The protagonist is being very vulnerable, and the protagonist also seems like really self-aware. Verse 4. This is a really interesting verse. So the protagonist is addressing her romantic partner again here with the word baby, a little bit of stuttering with the repetition of the word I. There's still some nerves here present. The protagonist is still talking about things that are vulnerable and personal to her. When it says running on star drip IVs, that's really interesting, right? That's kind of parallel to running on stardust. But star drip, it's like an IV drip. she states it in the song, that's a more like medicinal sort of stardust energy, and it makes it a little bit more tangible. It's still not, right? We're still talking about like a magical, whimsical sort of entity, an intangible sort of entity. But the word drip makes it seem more intense, and it makes it seem like something that is actually very, very helpful. It's like an IV, it's reviving her, it's stabilizing her, and it makes it very clinical as well. Like this is something that's very necessary. Either finds it so valuable that she's describing it as like a drip IV, or she was so lacking in the stardust energy that she needed an IV to be able to replenish her sources. There's a lot of ways to look at this. For me, the use of the word star drip IV makes the protagonist situation seem more serious. Really shows me that she was severely lacking in certain things. I wouldn't know how cruel the world was. It seems like the protagonist, when she was going through this really hard time, didn't have awareness about the outside world, and that kind of made her naive a little bit. I talked about this concept a little bit more in depth in my analysis of what I call Taylor Swift's most terrifying song, Right Where You Left Me. I will link my analysis down below. But in that song, the protagonist is isolated in a really like weird void of a purgatory due to a hard situation. That protagonist is just stuck, internally stuck, while the world is moving around her. It could be a similar thing here, where the protagonist had to rely on this star drip IV just to live, just to get through the day. When you are like in a situation where you're not okay to that extent, you're not gonna have like mental or emotional bandwidth to really do much else. You're just focused on surviving, as you should be, right? You're not gonna have time to like go out and experience things. So that's one way to interpret it. She doesn't know how cruel the world was. Maybe she had to take care of herself so much that she didn't have the time or the energy to go out and experience things and learn how to read people and like understand what the world is like. That's one interpretation. Another way to interpret this lyric is as a little bit sarcastic and a little bit like ironic. She could be saying that actually going through those experiences, having to rely on this metaphorical star drip IV, showed her how cruel the world could be. Like without that experience, she wouldn't know how cruel the world was, right? So there's different ways to interpret it. Like there's opposing ways to interpret it. It all just depends on what resonates with you the most. For me though, I'm a little bit more partial towards that second interpretation because I feel like this protagonist has been through a lot, and I feel like just having that mother figure rage at her would show her how cruel the world is. So that's why I'm more inclined to view this line as, you know, being a little bit sarcastic in a way. Then we have repetition of the lyric hot fire, hot weather, hot coffee. But this time, instead of it saying I'm better with you, the protagonist just says I'm better. So I feel like that's a good progression. I still would interpret that line the same way personally. It's just a reminder of the things that she didn't really have the ability to experience for a while. The hot fire, the hot weather, the hot coffee. When it says I'm better, that could just be the way she wanted to write that lyric. It doesn't have to be that deep. Or you can think of it as a progression of the protagonist growing, because it doesn't say I'm better with you. It's a little bit more independent and it shows growth. So maybe this is indicating that she's starting to experience like the hot fire, the hot weather, and the hot coffee. She's starting to recognize the passion in front of her, and she's starting to consume it and like participate in that feeling. That's how I'm thinking about it, at least for now. That's kind of just what's resonating with me at the moment. So I turn and I learn, and then in the background in a softer voice it says I learn it from you, babe. When it says I turn, I feel like she's turning like a new page. She is starting to change and improve and become a new version of herself, and she's saying that she's learning it from her romantic partner, which is good, right? I always talk about like dependency in relationships and power dynamics in these videos, but I think it is positive to learn good things from your partner. So I think this is pretty positive. I don't see any like major red flags about this relationship. I think it's the protagonist wanting to better herself. I think that this relationship she's in right now is inspiring her to like take a look at herself and to improve herself for herself, right? And also for her partner. If we look at the last lyric of verse 4 and we followed it into the second chorus, it says, so I turn, but I learn it from you, babe, not to turn into a wildfire. It's like the protagonist is really learning how to approach situations differently from her current romantic partner. Sometimes it does take another person to inspire you to change or to just show you that there's other ways to live life and to exist. So I think that's good. I think that's a much better relationship dynamic than we've had in other Lana songs we've analyzed so far. So I am still concerned due to all of the opposing diction in this song, but I'm like less concerned, which I'm pretty stoked about. We do have some repeated lyrics from the first chorus, not to turn into a wildfire to light up your night. I would still interpret that in the same way as before, with only a smile and nothing that hurts. In the first chorus, it said nothing that burns, but now it says nothing that hurts. So I feel like it's less metaphorical now with the word hurts. And I talk about this too on my channel, that when something is more literal and straightforward, like in the song Right Where You Left Me, there are a lot of straightforward lyrics in that song. I don't take that lightly. I take that very seriously as being indicative of a lot of emotion being present. When something is like direct, not metaphorical, it's not the absence of emotion, it's indication that there was a lot of emotion previously, right? It's like when you're so sad and you're so angry and you're feeling all these emotions and then you have a second of peace, you're able to like make very direct statements. So I view this as having a lot of emotion behind it. The word hurt, it's very direct and it's also showing awareness on part of the protagonist. I think this is talking about like emotional hurt. Baby, I run like a wildflower. It's an opposing idea because wildflowers can't run, they can't move because they have roots, which they're supposed to, but a wildfire can move. So it's interesting, right? I think she's taking the essence of a wildflower that we discussed earlier, being strong, being like independent, being self-sufficient, being kind of like fated to exist and to thrive, and she is bringing her own movement into that, which is really positive. And I think this is a very important progression from earlier where she was lying down, so she's running now, which actually makes me really stoked and really happy. The rest of this verse is repeated lyrics, but I want to concentrate on the new lyric at the end, and also I just want to point out the repetition of the word burn. She is really drawing a lot of attention to burning, and I feel like the protagonist was like a wildfire previously, right? So she's very aware of the bridges she burned or the emotions she burned and the people she hurt previously. So I think that repetition is just really signifying the awareness that she has about how her actions, you know, were self-sabotaging and they hurt others around her as well. Now I want to concentrate on the last lyric of this song. It says, it's you from whom I learn, learn. So we have repetition of that lyric and we also have repetition of the word learn. The protagonist is really making it known that she is learning from her current romantic partner. She's taking a cue from them and changing herself and her behaviors for the better. She is still wild, she is still herself, but she is like a better version of herself. She's like a less chaotic, more balanced version of wild, and I think that's really beautiful. It makes me happy that this relationship dynamic seems to be healthier than the other relationship dynamics we've had in previous Lana Del Rey songs. To sum up, I think this song is about changing yourself while still being true to yourself and respecting who you are, respecting that you have a wild nature about you. I think that's beautiful. And this song is also about wanting to change yourself and learning why you should and maybe how you should due to a romantic partner. One of the important parts of a relationship is to inspire one another and to grow together. So I think that's very beautiful. It's very wonderful. And the protagonist has so much awareness all throughout this song, aware of how she was, how she wants to be, and she's aware that, you know, she's learning from another person. This is really difficult work to do, to like change yourself like this. I feel like the protagonist sees the value in that. I love how at the end she was running like a wildflower. This shows me that the protagonist is taking the essence of a wildflower but making it her own. There's movement involved and running is like very lively and energetic. So I take that very positively and I think that the song ends on a very positive note. That's all I have for this song. Please tell me your thoughts down below in the comments. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!